Okay, so before I get into UV mapping a object, I want to talk about texel density first. So texel density is kind of this made-up term for the industry, um, and it sort of means pixels per inch, or pixels per any specific range of distance on an object in 3D space, not necessarily in UV space. So this is done a lot in really low poly games where texel density doesn't really matter so much. So you'll be running along and see something like this where the ground texture is really blurry, but the texture for an object is nice and crisp and clean. And that just means the texel density does not match up. And there's a reason really low poly games do that, and I'll kind of try to explain that in a minute, but it's usually a pretty bad thing. In any sort of situation, whether you're doing something for a film or a video game, if you have something like this where your textures are really blurry on the ground and then your model texture is nice and crisp, it just kind of ruins the immersiveness of whatever you're working on. So it's something you want to kind of try to avoid in most cases. And a lot of studios will have some sort of standard where they have every object needs to have so many pixels per inch. So one way to fix this is using tileable textures. So right now I have this grass texture on our ground, and it is a tileable texture. And basically what that means is it can be repeated and it will be seamless. So if I go to my object or my material for this ground plane, I want to go to the 2D placement node that's attached to the file node. So let's go to Window, Rendering Editors, Hypershade, and it's this Lambert 2, so I'll just map that. And so I want to look at this Place 2D Texture node. So if I click on that, in here you're going to see Repeat UVs. So here I can actually start repeating or tiling this grass texture. So let's start with something like 10 and 10. So now this grass texture is being repeated 10 times on this ground plane. So the texel density of the ground plane is starting to match up a little better with my little house here. So that's something you want to keep in mind. The other thing to kind of solve that problem is just looking at your objects and figuring out what size texture you need for a specific object. So obviously, if I have, and just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to duplicate this house and scale it way up. So if I come over here and just compare the texture on these two, the texture here is nice and crisp. You know, if I'm standing here looking at it, and over here it's really blurry. So as you're modeling a scene, you want to kind of assess the situation of, you know, this is a really big model and this is a really small model. So obviously I wouldn't want to use the same size texture on them, because then the texel densities aren't going to match up. So I could say, well, this is already a really high high resolution texture, and I don't want to increase this one anymore. So to get those to match up a little bit better, I would just probably go in and decrease the resolution for this model so they match up a little bit better. and that is the basic concept of having equal texel density throughout your models, and it is a very important thing. So let's get rid of that ground plane. So this is what I'm going to UV layout with you guys. It's a simple object. Let's turn on our wireframe unshaded. It's a pretty simple low poly object, and yeah, it shouldn't be too difficult to lay out the UVs for. Let me go ahead. See, I've got a lot of history on this, so I want to go ahead and delete that history just because it's going to speed up. Now if we look at our UVs for this, obviously I just modeled it. I wasn't really paying attention to UVs as I modeled it, so if we look at our UV texture editor, it's going to be pretty crazy. So like I talked about before in part 1 of this, is that usually when it's a very non-organic model, something that's got a lot of right angles on it, I don't, you know, I'll start out just by doing an automatic map. So I'll click automatic map. And that will give me something, a good starting point to work with. So there's two things I want to do before I actually come in and start pushing and pulling things around. The first thing I want to do is apply some sort of UV grid texture to this. So I already have one downloaded on my desktop. So if I go to assign new material, or assign favorite material, and I'll just assign a blend to this. And then go to material attributes, color, file, and I will just load up my desktop. I have a UV grid here. So you can find these anywhere. You can, you know, I just basically Googled UV grid and I downloaded the first one that came up. So this is a really useful thing to have applied to your texture map. And it's good for different reasons. One is that you're going to see that everything as you're UVing will have equal texel densities, because you have letters and you have numbers. So as long as those are the same size, and as long as your squares in here are the same size, that's going to mean that you have equal texel density throughout your model. The other useful thing, or reason that this is useful, is knowing the correct orientation of things. So if I were to go in and just select this little UV shell and flip that around, I would know that that's backwards because all of my letters on that are backwards. So that's another reason that's pretty useful. I do, however, think this is pretty bright, and my eyesight is very important to me while I work. I don't want to burn out my retinas by staring at really bright colors on other bright colors, so I'm going to, for now, I'm just going to turn that off, and I'll turn on my toggle shaded UV display. So I just did an automatic map, and it gives me this result. So a lot of times I have I see students working on things, and they have like a minor object like this, and they say, oh, this is going to be way in the background, so it doesn't really matter. I don't need to spend a lot of time on UV, so I just do a quick automatic map and leave it at that. But that's a very, very bad thing to do, especially for non-human hero pieces. So if this was like a hero piece, yeah, you would think I should spend time on this and lay out the UVs for it. But if it's not, if it's just a background piece, you would probably think it doesn't matter. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the UVs. Well, what happens whenever you do that is just throw a quick automatic map on something and then forget about it. And then you apply a texture to this. Because you have all this empty space, you are basically every time you load a texture to Maya, it loads every single pixel. So if you have a texture map like this that's got a lot of empty space and it's not using all of these pixels, it's kind of slowing down your system and slowing down your render because Maya has to load all of these pixels anyway. So if you have a really small background object and you just throw a quick texture map on it, not worry about UV layout, and it's basically loading this huge image with all these pixels in it for a minor unimportant background object, and that's really going to slow down your render. Whether it be a real-time rendering or a advanced renderer like Mental Ray, it's going to slow down because it's got to load all of these pixels for this tiny little object. So really, whenever you go in and start laying out the UVs for this, you need to try to utilize as much of this one-to-one space as possible. Oops, I keep hitting my Windows button. So I want to make these squares on here a little easier to see. So I'll go to that place 2D texture node. So I'll bring my hypershade back up. There's my blend. So I can go ahead and graph that. Go to that 2D texture node and go to repeat UVs. And I'm just going to let's try something like 3. So that's a little bit better. Those are a smaller size now. So a little bit easier to see those. Alright, so then I have my automatic map. The other big benefit of starting with an automatic map is because now I know that everything in here is equal texel densities. So I can kind of scale these guys up and down together and they will remain the same texel densities. So I usually start by grabbing everything, all my UVs, and just moving them to the side. And then I can sort of deal with one thing at a time over here in my actual UV space. So usually I like to just start with the biggest object first because that's going to take up the most space, and it'll be easier for me to kind of think about using up my UV space. So that's going to be these two guys. And basically it's two different sides to the same object. Now if this were going to be for a really low poly game, I could just mirror this. I could put these right on top of each other and not worry about it. So basically what I could do is just flip this guy and then put it right on top. And just pretty much call it a day. The problem with that is if you're using a normal map. So if you are using a normal map, because that UV is flipped, it's not gonna, your shading isn't gonna shade properly on both sides. Also, if you have any sort of text, so imagine there was something written or carved into here, like a name or beware or something like that, since it's an old wooden lamp post. It's going to show up flipped on this side if it is flipped, so that beware or whatever would be written backwards, which may be cool, but in our case I'm going to leave those separate. So I could leave them like this, and I could start trying to fill this up with stuff and put things in here. Or I could flip one around, which I might do that, and try to fit them together a little bit better, like that. And I could still fill that in with stuff, but I think I might actually like it the other way. I think I might leave it like this, and try to put as much as I can inside of here to use as much of that UV space as possible. So then I have the insides and outsides of that main post or base. And I'm going to say that I think that this bottom section here, I want that to be made out of a different material. So maybe that's metal and then this is wood. So I think just by looking, if I separate those, it will give me a little more space to work with. So I'm going to separate those just by, I'll go to my edge mode and I'll select both of those edges, and then I'll just right click, polygons, cut UV edges. And now if I go back to my UV mode, I'll select a UV on both of those, control right click to shell, and then I can move those little sections off for now. And then that will give me, that should clear up some room where I can put these guys closer together and hopefully give me a little more UV space. So now I want to deal with the sides of this. So I have, that should be these guys here. If you're not sure what something is on your UV layout, so say, oh, I have, you know, these little pieces here and I'm not quite sure what they are, you could always just select a component like a vertex or edge or UV. So I'll just select my UVs and I'll go to UV shell. It's going to show up on our model what that is. So if I look at this, if I hit F on my keyboard, it'll zoom in. I'll see that I have all of those back UVs selected. So I can take that and move that around and place it in here. Now I do notice that it has this little guy at the bottom also attached here. And again, because I want that bottom base to be a different material, I'm going to detach that little part. So just select that edge, right click, cut UV edges, UV, go to my shell. So that's something you're going to see me do a lot, is use those marking menus. And just pull that down here somewhere, and then I'll deal with that later. And then this one is going to be the front part of that. So I'll make sure that I have that in there. And again, I'm going to cut that off. So cut UV edges, and then just put that down there somewhere for now. Now for this part here, for this guy, and I might want to do this for this one too, these are at an angle, so the plane at which they were mapped is going to have some skewed or stretched polygons or stretched UVs. So especially apparent with this front part here. So you'll see if I go down here and look at this F and the E, you'll see that compared to the D and the G, they are stretched, and that's just because the plane of that automatic map was projecting it from this straight on angle to something that's, you know, at like a 45-degree angle, and it makes that stretch. So I'm going to use my unfold tool just to unfold that and see if I can get those to smooth out. And I'll zoom in here so you can see what's going to happen. So I have all of those selected. I'll go to my unfold tool and I'll just, and you can see here that that's automatically going to say, okay, these are stretched, and I'm going to even those out to where they're not so stretched anymore. So that's what that does. And you can go ahead and do that to this one too, just for the sake of solidarity. And I'm going to try to move those close together, not right on top of each other, but again, I do want to use as much texture space as possible, so I want to try and move those together if I can. Alright, so I have that first part mapped out, and I may want to rearrange these at some point if things aren't quite fitting the way I want them to fit, but for now I think this is working pretty good. So the next biggest thing, and again I like to deal with the biggest things first, is this long pull here. And this one's pretty simple because it's a cube. You just need to figure out where you want your seams. So, and I think we probably need our seams here because this is going to be, if we have, if this is a piece of wood, we're going to have a wood grain going one direction on this piece, and then we'll see sort of like the rings of the tree in this piece. So it's going to be, the texture is going to be a little different anyway, so we might as well have our seams there. So I'm going to take our wood. So if you have a lot of stuff in here and you're not sure what pieces this belongs to, or what out of all of these, which ones belong to this top piece of wood, what you can do in your 3D view is just select a face. So I just select one face here, and you can see where that's selected here. So then you can grow your selection. So to grow a selection is Shift and then your little arrow keys by your question mark. So the ones that are the two keys that are above the comma and the period. So if I hold down Shift and hit that period button, it's going to grow my selection to everything on that's connected to that single object, even though they're combined. And then I can jump over here, Control right click and go to Shell, or I'm sorry, Control right click, convert my selection to UVs first, and then I can move those around. So I can see that, okay, here are all the pieces to that pole. And because all of these are on 90-degree angles and I did an automatic map, these don't need to be unfolded at all. They're already facing that plane it was mapped to. So the only thing I really need to do here is sew everything together. So it's one shell. So I'll go to Polygons, move and sew UV edges after I select an edge. Select another edge, and I'm going to hit the G key. The G key is basically going to repeat your last action. So G as in girl, and then that will move and sew that one, move and sew that one, and then I'll sew those ends right there. So that's it for that one. Then I can move it over here somewhere in that space. So next I have mainly the only thing I have left is the lantern, the chain, and the little metal piece that's going around that that piece of wood. So the chain, I'll deal with the chain specifically in a minute, but let me just look at the lantern first. So I'll do the same thing I did for that piece of wood for the lantern. So I'll go in here and say face, select the face, Shift period key to grow my selection until I have everything for that lantern selected, and then I can control right click to UV, and then I can move that entire section of lantern away somewhere just to work on it. I'll eventually move it back up here after I'm done working on it. So I have sort of the glass part of the lantern first, so these guys, and I think the way I'm going to texture them, they're all pretty much going to be the same. So I'm just going to put them all right on top of each other. That the way they will all use the same texture space, and it'll save a lot of space in my texture map. So, and I'm not going to have, even if I do have a normal map on this this model, I wouldn't have a normal map on this part of the model because it's glass and it's going to be smooth, and you know, there's not going to really be any bumps or anything like that. Now if I wanted to add variation, like if I wanted to make some of these cracked and some of them not, then I would keep them separate. But in this case, I don't really want much variation in these, because I probably eventually want to emit light from this. So they're going to be kind of bright and shiny, and not really, you're not going to see a lot of detail in there anyway. So to get those right on top of each other, you can snap the UVs together. So I'll just select one V or one UV, and if I hold down my V key, that's going to snap. So then I can just snap, select these one at a time, and just snap them like that. This one's upside down, so obviously I want to flip it first, like that. And then I'll select those, hold down the V key, and snap all of those together. And you'll notice that this is getting a darker blue as I'm overlapping these. And again, that's to show you that these are overlapped, but in this case, I don't care. It's actually what I want. So I've got that done, and I can put that over here somewhere. It might fit a little better down here. That's sort of the angle everything's going. And then I have the sort of frame of that lantern. So that's all of these guys. And again, if I wanted these all to be the same, or every side to be the same, I could overlap them. But in this case, I'm going to leave them separate. So sometimes if you want, you know, it's always good to keep in mind that you don't want any stretching going on. But sometimes if it's an area like this inside edge here, it's not really going to have a lot of texture detail anyway, it doesn't really matter too much. And I feel like rather than having all of these guys separate, which these are the inside edges there, I feel like if I just go ahead and connect these in here, it will save me the headache of having to texture these individually apart from this. So what I'm going to do is just go to my edge mode, select all 4 of those edges on each one of those. And that's, yeah, that might be something I have to fix right there. And then I can right click, polygons, move and sew. I'm just going to move and sew all of those guys together. And they're overlapping, which I don't want, so I can select these little corner edges, and again I'll hit my G key to sew those together, because that just repeats my last action. And just to save some time, I'm just going to shift and select all of those. I'm selecting some of these inside edges, which don't matter because they're already sewed, so just hitting move and sew isn't really going to do anything to them. So select all of those, then hit the G key, and that should sew them together. Now as you're UVing, you're going to see that you may have little geometry problems here and there that you didn't realize you had. Like I have this guy for no reason. So I'm going to select that edge, hit my F key in my viewport to see where that is. And yeah, it's sort of just there for no reason. So I just hit Control Delete to get rid of it. And I think that's good. So I'm going to go ahead and sew this little part onto all of those. So again, just select the edge, polygons, move and sew. Oops. Edge. Okay, so this is going to be difficult because they're kind of already joined together here. So before I do that, I'm going to select those edges and just go to polygons, cut UV edges. So one thing that I forgot to do, I just realized it now, is turn on my border edges. So again, that's under display, polygons, texture border edges, and that will just help me see where the seams are for everything as I'm working. So now I can come in here, go to my edge, polygons, move and sew, and I'll just sew all those. Oops, not that top part. Let's rotate that guy around so he's the right orientation. Polygons, move and sew. And then one of them will need that little bottom square sewed to it, so just pick one and move and sew. So these are all pretty much ready to go. I still need to do the top part there, which I think I'm going to do this part different from the rest of it. So I'll just leave these there for now. I might want to throw some things inside there. So here's that little top square. So I'm just going to grab these, all four of those edges, and just go to polygons, move and sew that together like that. Maybe do an unfold. I don't think I really need to, but just to do it, I'll do it. And then the rest of this, I'm going to try and just sew all of that together. So I'm just going to grab all of those edges there, with the exception of the inside edges, because I don't want to sew that piece that I just did onto that. So I'm just going to hold down Shift and deselect those inside edges. And now I'll just right click, polygons, move and sew, and it moved that away. Didn't really do what I wanted it to do, so I want to make sure that I'm not sewing all those guys together. So I'm just going to hold down Control and marquee over those so it deselects those edges. So now I only have the edges here that I want to sew together. So polygons, move and sew, and then let's try sewing those guys together, and then I'll do an unfold. add something like that. This is going to cause a little stretching, but it's no big deal. Again, we're going to be looking at this in most cases from this angle, so we're not going to see the top too much. And if we're clever about how we texture this, that tiny little bit of stretching in there isn't going to be a very big deal. Alright, so that is our lantern. Our lantern is done. We just need to figure out now how we want it to fit in our scene. So I'll go ahead and put this guy inside of one of these. Make sure nothing is overlapping. Get the rest of these lined up. If I want to, I could rotate them something like that and see if I could get them to fit in there. Let's see if that will work. 2 at a time. So yeah, that might actually work. So I'm going to fit those there. Grab this, rotate it. Maybe I need them just so they fit better. I'll bring this one down. That guy back in there. And I'll put this one up here so that fits pretty well. Now I have a lot of empty space in here that I could try to use, so I'm going to grab these, the insides of those, and again there's not going to be a lot of detail in here in these things because they're going to be emitting light, so I'm going to scale those down a little bit, and that, yes, that's going to offset the texel density, but again there's not going to be a lot of detail in here, so that's okay. I'm not too concerned about that. If you have the space, you know, I'm probably going to have plenty of space, so I really don't have to do that. So maybe I'll just wait and see if I should do that. And then I have this little guy. Again, he's going to be on top, probably not a lot of texel density, but I have the room, so I'm going to use it like that. So next we have the chain. And I have the base I need to do too, but the chain here is it's one of those things that, like I talked about the helix shape before, just being really difficult to UV layout, and it's one of those things where you might just want to do one chain link, delete the rest, and then duplicate the one that you do the UV layout for. It's just going to make life a lot easier for you rather than having to do all these individually. So I'm just going to go over to face mode and delete these guys. Delete all those faces that I don't need. And again, you can use grow selection and delete those. So so now I just have one chain link, and then I can duplicate it after I do the UV layout for that. So again, I'll just select a face there, grow that selection, control right click to UVs, move that off. So here's all my chain parts. Let's move those together just so we can see what's going on close up. Make sure I got them all. Okay, so the first issue I see is that some of them might be overlapping a little bit, or they might be flipped. just for the sake of figuring out what's going on here and making sure that I don't sew anything together that's kind of messed up, is I'm just going to select all of my edges here and I'm going to cut all of them. So cut UV edges. And then I can sew them back up based on what I have here. So let's select these edges in our 3D viewport. And then I'll come over here, right click, polygons, move and sew. And then let's do the same for that outside one. Polygons, move and sew. Let's see if I can just select these guys, go to their shell and move them away from each other to see what I have going on. So now I can select these guys in the center. And polygons, move and sew. So that's one side of it. I just need to do the other side. So the other side it's pretty much an identical match to that side. So I think what I can do, I think I can get away by just selecting all of those edges for the remainder of those, and then I'm just going to control select these edges, so I deselect those edges, and then I can go to right click polygons, move and sew. Didn't exactly do what I wanted because I have some flipped UV shells, so let me go in and flip those first to get those in the right orientation, and then I will try that again. So edge, select all of those edges, control deselect the edges here, polygons, move and sew. Still didn't quite do what I wanted, but let me see if I can just unfold that and see how it looks. So that doesn't look too bad. Let me unfold this one too, and then sew these guys together. So sometimes whenever you unfold it, it will scale things up or down, but that's okay because you can just come in, scale it back down. Line that back up. I'll sew those two edges together, so polygons, move and sew, and then I'll do unfold one more time just to get those guys nice and unfolded. Alright, so my chain, I have one chain link done. So now I can come in and duplicate my other chain links and get that set back up right, and now they're going to have the same exact UV layout as these. So I can go over to, I need to separate these or extract these, and then I'll just recombine them with my mesh. So I'm going to go to face mode, I'm going to select all of those faces and grow selection to make sure I have them all selected. And then I'm going to go to my polygons menu set, go up to mesh, extract, and that's just going to extract that into a single object. And then I'll just do center pivot to make that a little easier to move around. And then I can just duplicate, rotate that. I'm not going to do it exact. I want it to look a little offset. Duplicate. Alright, so now I can jump in here and delete these some of these edges that I don't need. Just delete those guys. Make sure to delete those. Just because they're extra polygons that I don't really need. Oops. So I don't have anything selected. And I had up here where I had this kind of set up to where the chain was actually attached. I don't really need that, so I'll get rid of that in a second. And you'll realize little things like this as you're doing your UV layout, and it's no big deal. As you're working, you're going to realize you need to make changes to your model. Okay, so now I have the chains, so now I can select everything and combine those guys back together. So I'll go to Mesh, Combine. Now the chains are all UV laid out. They're just all right on top of each other. So I can just go to UV, select one, Control to Shell, and I can pull those guys apart now. And they should all have the same UVs. So with these two, I can do something like that, try and fit them together. I don't know how well it's going to work. Oops. And select those, and then I can put them in here somewhere. So they'll go right down there. So then I have this. So I realize now that, okay, so I don't need all this geometry in here to make it look like that, or actually, it's just using up geometry that I don't need. So I'm going to try and delete some of these edges, but I want to keep an eye what's going on here to make sure this doesn't deform in my UV layout while I'm doing this. So I'm going to start just by trying to merge some vertices. So I don't want these two holes here anymore, obviously, so I will go to my Merge Vertex tool and see if I can merge those guys together to get rid of that hole. And do the same here. So it's going to look a little wonky here, but as soon as I come in and select those edges and hit Control Delete, it's going to fix that. So that was pretty easy. So now I just need to sew everything together here. So I have the outside edges. So I'll just try to sew those. Doesn't really matter where, because our angle is so sharp and this is obviously a low poly model. Our seam isn't going to be very noticeable right there, and there's things we can do that to hide our seam. So like we can add scratches on our edges and stuff like that. So it's not that big of a deal in this case. So I'm going to go ahead and just try to sew all those together. Move and sew, move and sew, move and sew, and then these guys move and sew, move and sew. And that should be all of those. So I still have some leftovers. Need to figure out where they go. Let's to make sure what I'm doing. I'll select this face and grow that selection. So that's going to show me that I have more here than what I need. So like these guys are probably the inside somewhere, the inside of that I'm never going to see. So I can just delete them. So I'm going to select those guys in face mode and delete them because I don't need them. Then I can take this guy, move that over to my somewhere, try to get that to fit. If it doesn't, so it's not really fitting this way, so what I might do is just cut this part off. So polygons, cut UV edges, and just move it over here somewhere. Maybe sew it up to this one. Nope, that goes there. I'll just move that right there. And probably flip those around so they fit in that space a little bit better. Alright, so then I should just have the base left. Although I'm not really sure where these go, so I'm going to go to Vertex Mode, select those, and some of them are down here, some of them are up here at the top, so we probably need to sew those to our little top section that we missed. So edge, so that's probably okay, so one of those is this top part here, this inside that we don't need. So again, I'll go to face mode, select that face, and hit delete. And then that's those guys. So I do need those. So polygons, move and sew. Didn't work. Polygons, move and sew. There we go. And I'll do an unfold one more time. Oops, not scale up, unfold. And these guys should just belong to our base, but I just want to make sure. So let's go to face mode, select those faces. Oh, I'm still in that unfold smooth UV tool. So again, sometimes you're going to have trouble selecting because you're still in that. So just hit your W key and that'll throw you out of it. Alright, so those are to the base. So go to my UVs, move those down here where the base is. And I'll try to sew all those guys together. So move and sew. And sew. Alright, so there's the sections of the base. I have a little room up here. So let's see if this guy will fit better. Like this. No, not really. I might just scale him down a little bit. Get that to fit a little better. So I can take these guys and move them up here where I have room. And I usually like to keep things together, so pieces together, but I think I have room here. Maybe not. So I have some room there. So in this case, I'm just going to separate them, and I have some room there. So now I have everything laid out. Everything is around the same texel density, so I'm just going to scale everything up to fit into that UV space now. So I'll select everything, move it into place, scale it up to try and get it to select or cover as much of that UV space as possible. Sometimes it's also okay to scale it out or stretch it a little bit just so you're using all your UV space. You can get really tedious with this and zoom in and make sure everything is like super close to the edge, but sort of what I'm doing now. But that is basically it. My UV layout for my lantern is complete, and I'm using I do have some empty spaces in here, but for the most part I'm using my UV space well. If I wanted to at this point, if I want to add more things, I can, if I add some ropes or some chains or something, or like maybe an arrow is, someone is using it as target practice or something like that, I could I could add geometry to that, and I have space in my UV layout to where I could UV those options. So sometimes it's okay to leave a little space here and there in case you want to edit and add geometry later, but for the most part you want to use as much of this as possible. So that's it. That is my UV layout for my lantern. I hope this helps. So next I'm going to do a UV layout for something very organic and maybe like a human head, or that the dog head that I was messing around with earlier, to show you how I'd approach that. And that's, in my opinion, it's almost a little bit easier than dealing with something like this. So I'm going to hit save. So I have my UV layout saved, and that's it. I'll see you in part 3 of UV mapping in Maya.